Hello and welcome to episode 5 of History Echoes podcast. I'm your host, Mick Zosky, with Mark Burry, and we are both broadcasting from our own homes in separate parts of the country. Now, Mark, is there anything you want to jump in on top, or you want to talk about Parliament's return this week?
Um, I we could just talk about Parliament's return. Yeah, why not?
Well, it's one of the first orders of business will be the election of a speaker,
Hmm.
and then King Chuckles is going to come and talk to us about wanting to be somebody's tampon.
Yeah. Oh, the poor man. The things that you have to live down from your youth when people are watching. Fortunately, nobody was watching us.
Youth. He was in his 40s or 50s, cheating on
Uh,
his wife.
I don't know if 50s, maybe 40s, but we're also talking about someone who was pretty. His development was not normal. Let's put it that way.
Oh, poor rich man.
Yeah, well, I really wouldn't want to trade. I do value my privacy. I hang out with all this crap, and nobody talks about me in ways that I care about. So, but yeah, he will come here and he'll do the job that he was raised to do, which is to be Canadian head of state among 12 of his realms, the UK being one, and us being one, and several other places, some of which you probably wouldn't even want to visit, are among his realms. But this is the only one that the United States actually covets. So it's interesting that he's doing the speech from the throne, and I think it's very much connected.
I was a little taken aback by Keir Starmer's lack of obvious support for us in the conversation with Trump and his administration. And the royal watchers have been saying, well, you can tell that Charles is trying to support us because he's using secret hand signals and wearing funny hats. How do
Well,
you think, what do you expect from this speech from the throne? A lot of hot air?
well, I mean, he doesn't write the speech from the throne, so maybe he'll throw in a few of his own platitudes. But the speech from the throne will hopefully set out some sort of legislative agenda. But it also, besides the words in it, the fact that he's here sends a signal to the United States that Canada isn't just sitting there alone; that it does have this connection. Despite Starmer, it does have this connection to the UK. Another thing that's very interesting about this is that Trump and his Gonas really, really are into this whole royalty thing, like in ways that are much more extreme than most Canadians. So to them is so classy, and they the like be a bit of envy and also maybe a bit of backing off. And I think that is the idea behind having the king here, and that will be the thing that's reported in the States. Him with whatever he's wearing and doing the speech, but the contents of the speech won't be. So there'll be two messages from the speech. One will be the legislative agenda of Carney's, whatever it will be at this point, and then this other message to the United States. And there'll be very separate messages, and hopefully the people who they're aimed at will hear them. Hopefully for Carney, I mean, hopefully for Canada, the Americans will hear it. Hopefully for Carney, Canadians will hear the legislative agenda.
Well, it'll be interesting to see how that affects Trump's performance at the G7. He's now confirmed that he's coming.
Yeah, yeah, that's good. I wouldn't be surprised if he leaves early or something. He's so like what we saw with the South African president. He's so weird these days, and hair triggery and sneaky, and with all these creeps around him. I could see them stomping out, like making this into a show about Trump. I mean, everything has to be about Trump all the time, which is unfortunate. And now we're talking about Trump, but
Yeah.
it's always about Trump. And if Carney shines, or if anything good happens there, I could see him trying to derail it, or him trying to say that maybe Putin should be back in, or some kind of stuff that really throws a monkey wrench into everything.
Hmm. Well, there was after the G7 in Charlevoix when Trump left, what seemingly a happy man after a joint statement. Then I thought it might have been the straw that broke the camel's back with Trudeau. I mean, there was some I've forgotten what the criticism was, but it was after that Trump went off on him.
Yeah, I mean, guys like Trump live in a world where they can say anything about you, but if you say anything about them, they will remember it till they die. Now, it's really stupid of a Canadian prime minister to ever talk into an open mic or to anybody with a big mouth about how they feel about the president of the United States. It's just so stupid.
Hmm.
Um, real unforced error there. But um, but yeah, it seems to be a bit of a clean slate with Carney. Trump has an odd reverence for him, and but it's not just Carney who's going to be there. In fact, Carney probably won't be a big player in this thing. It'll be the Germans and the French and the British and the Italians, which another wild card, by the way.
Hmm.
So you have two fascists among the seven, and we don't know what the agenda is. We don't know what's been done by what they call the Sherpas who organize these meetings, and then we often know very little about what happens inside.
Well,
We always,
the finance guys are in Calgary right now.
yeah, yep, they're just in the snow. Yep. Now, what they're talking about would be really interesting to know. Are they talking about tariffs, like the reality of tariffs? Are they talking about um, interest rates, because interest rates in the states are going to be under pressure again with the inflation that's being built into their system, and the freak out of the bond market over the fact that Trump's new budget bill, if it passes the Senate, which is kind of doubtful, but it would add $3 trillion of debt to the United States' balance sheet, and even Wall Street doesn't like that. So yeah, I'd love to know what they're talking about. It really would be great if this was much more of an open process. But journalists will go and they'll try, we'll have some of the best journalists in the world there. So maybe somebody will get something out of this thing, let us know what the hell's happening with it. And it's coming just on the heels of this throne speech. So Carney's, legislative plan again, and again, I add the caveat of whatever it might be, will be out. And then Carney will be also playing to the hometown crowd, um, in Alberta. And then there's a whole Alberta crowd thing going on. And with the backdrop of Poilievre waiting for the time to run out so he can finally have the election he needs to get into the House of Commons. We're still waiting for a 30-day period from the last election so that the guy who won the Crowfoot seat can resign, because he's not actually officially a member of Parliament, and then give his notice and then have Carney call the election. But Poilievre is out there campaigning. So lots of things are happening in Alberta right now.
I thought Poilievre was in Ottawa still this week. No, has he started going door knocking?
He was in Alberta. He's been back in Ottawa, around Parliament Hill, but he has been flying back and forth. Now, I guess he's doing that on the Conservative Party dime because he's not a member of Parliament, so he doesn't have an airline pass anymore. But yeah, I would think he'll go out there again as soon as he can, as soon as there's no reason to be in Ottawa. He had the default place for him is Alberta right now, but he had to deal with the caucus, the post-election caucus meeting, which was long and has put him in a bit of a bind. But yeah, he'll be back in Alberta
Well,
campaigning because my God, if he loses this election,
he pretty made everybody. What has he got? 72 members of his shadow cabinet for a cabinet of 24 by Carney?
yeah, for whatever that's worth. Though, like it's unlike parliamentary secretaries and ministers, people who are in shadow cabinets and things, they don't get anything more than a title. They don't get extra money in their pay packet or anything. It's interesting that one of the people who wanted to be in the shadow cabinet, whose name escapes me partly because I really don't care about him, is trying to run for speaker, which we can segue into in a while. But yeah, I mean, so these a bunch
Is
of
that
people have a bunch of
is that Chris
titles.
D'Entremont,
Yeah, I think so. Yeah,
he was deputy speaker
who
also in the
didn't
last
get in.
house, right?
Um, yeah, I think if I hope that that Fraser gets it again. Um, because he did a good job, and he um, there's no reason to not have him be speaker again. He wasn't speaker for that long. It's not like somebody who's had the job through, a couple of majority parliaments back, like Gib Perrond or the speakers in the 90s and
Milliken.
early 2000s. Um, yeah, so I saw him Fraser. I'm sorry. Um, yeah, senility is a bitch. It really is. It is, and every time I have a lapse like that, I think, oh my god, another step closer to watching The Price is Right every day. But yeah, I don't see why he wouldn't get the job again. It's not quite close enough in terms um, of seats for the government to find it necessary to appoint a speaker from the opposition. If it was one more seat that in the Liberals' hands, then you would appoint a speaker from the opposition so that the speaker would be obliged to vote with the government on a tie, one of those obscure rules. So that lack of one seat does make the race open to Elizabeth May, who apparently wants it, and to, I'm sure, people that we haven't heard of who've tried before, or who are parliamentary nerds. And one of the things that happened with Andrew Scheer
Ruby
was that
Dalla
there was
wants it, I understand.
who does?
Ruby Dalla.
Oh my lord! Yeah, yeah,
She's
she
not
should
an
be.
MP. That was a joke, listeners.
Yeah, well, maybe she could be appointed to the Senate and get it somehow that way.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
yeah, I wow, that was a good one. Um, the um, it used to be, if you were speaker, that was really the end of your political career, because you had sort of risen to this august, serious, nonpartisan position. So you wouldn't normally go back into the partisan sphere and get into fights again. You would either retire, or some speakers, a couple of them back in the day, were appointed governor general, or maybe become a lieutenant governor in a province or something. Just they would find a nice place for you. But now with Scheer's um, move, a few, in to run for the Conservative, we now have a situation where being a speaker is not it's just another job on the Hill. And I think actually he did such a disservice to that job by going back into active politics. Maybe he shouldn't run. Maybe he shouldn't have run for speaker in the first place when he was so young, um, and had a lot of years of potential political work ahead of him. But he did, and he was elected. And I don't know whether Harper set that up because he wanted to give him sort of a consolation for not making cabinet, or what the deal was. But we have this guy, and it's so odd to have a former speaker. I mean, it's not odd for 39.999 million Canadians. It's it's certainly a who gives a shit kind of situation. But it's very odd for people who've actually, watched the House of Commons and sat in the galleries of the House of Commons, to see somebody who was a speaker, who's supposed to be really, really neutral, get back into politics and be not just an active politician, but a really nasty one. And now he's going to be the head of the opposition in the House of Commons until Poilievre gets back, which might actually be before they come back again in the fall.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on when the
I expect this
by-election
to
is
be involved.
finished. And
It should be a really quick one. They have to wait till the paperwork is done for the last guy, so that he can be sworn in, so he can quit. And then Carney said he would call the by-election right away. So it could be this summer, and then the House of Commons is not going to sit very long after this throne speech. That's for sure. A couple of weeks,
yes.
and pass the legislation needed to pay the bills, and then go home. I'm sure they're all exhausted. Can you imagine how tired those people must be? All of them.
You mean after an election and a bitter parliament before that?
Yeah, the bitter parliament, the election, and of course, everybody who's a member of the House of Commons had a run on that. But then there were a lot of people who were in the Liberal Party who were involved in the leadership race, including the Prime Minister. So you've got people who've just been
Right.
campaigning constantly for months upon months upon months, often 7 days a week, especially MPs in ridings that were usable or winnable or close or whatever, and people on the PM staff and you know, I just don't know how physically they're able to do this around the clock for so long, with the stress and uncertainty, the personal uncertainty of the job. You know, am I going to have a job in after the election? And for staffers, the same thing. Am I going to have a job? Am I going to? Is my life going to be totally turned upside down? Are there any jobs for me if I lose my job? You know, these are things that everybody who ran for election would have to worry about, unless you were from someplace in rural Alberta running as a Tory. And and yeah, I just can't imagine how tired these people must be.
The opposition leader's office is budgeted for the amount of MPs you have in your caucus. So the OLO under
Right.
Poilievre is going to be quite wealthy. They're going to have like lots of money for making videos and spawning all sorts of stunts. It'll be another. It won't be a quiet parliament, I don't
There would
suspect.
have been a lot of people though who there would have been a lot of people who had been lined up for cabinet and lined up for chief of staff jobs and comms director jobs and stuff in a conservative government,
Oh God.
who didn't get, you know, who aren't going to get to see those jobs, at least not for a while. That would be hard to take. And you know, people like Jenny Byrne, you know, supposedly has her own business. I don't know how much business she's been able to do, but you know, her own sort of future is definitely up in the air. And there were people I know who worked for lobbying agencies and stuff who ran as mostly as conservatives and lost. One guy who was particularly, I think, would have made a very good member of parliament was Gary Keller, and he ran up in the North Bay Temagami area and lost by about 1,000 votes. He had been John Baird's chief of staff way back in the day, and is one of the smartest people I've ever met in my life. And it's a real loss that he didn't get elected. I think he would have made a stellar member of parliament. But you know, people like that it's gonna, you have to get back on your feet somehow. One of the hardest things for people I've heard is that if you're a minister in, say, a controversial government, and Paul Dick, who was a public works minister in Brian Mulroney's government, comes to mind, often find it extremely difficult to get a job after they're in cabinet, especially if there's a change in government. And some of them will hang out a shingle as a consultant or whatever, but really not do any business, and try to get back in the game somehow. And it's tough. Politics is a hard mistress.
Hmm. Yeah, interesting. In the shadow cabinet of Poilievre, that neither Shuv Majumdar or Neil Giovanni got, who were both kind of strong Poilievre loyalists. Neither of them got anything. They got no plum, and I wonder if that's because they have leadership aspirations.
Oh, I don't know. Maybe they just didn't want it. Um,
Hmm.
I mean, really, what's the prize, right? Like, you get to be the shadow minister of uh, Canadian heritage or something like, and um, you know, it's no one's gonna throw a party for you. It is basically asking questions about that stuff in question period. I mean, uh, Polyev used the minister of finance critic's position, you know, to really push his political career. But even when you have those things, if there's by some fluke like a fast destruction of this minority government, and it still is a minority government, and an election, that doesn't mean the person who's the finance critic is going to be the next finance minister, right? Like, there's no guarantees. There's really not a lot of upside except a little bit of bragging rights. And I don't think the public cares at all who these people are. You know, it's all centered on the prime minister and the people who get to lead off in question period.
But
Uh, and
you
and
get some guaranteed spots in QP though, right? I mean, like especially if your
well,
file is hot, right? It can be quite good for helping your star rise.
yeah, that's true. Yeah, and that's one of the guarantees of being the finance critic, is that you probably get some questions, and especially if the leader's not around that day, which means Fridays and Mondays you've got a pretty good shot at getting one of the first questions in, and maybe being scrummed on the way out or whatever. But it's not anywhere comparable to being the finance minister. You'll have a story in a newspaper or a TV piece or whatever about some policy thing, and there'll be a line or two from the critic or from the leader of the opposition, and that'll be it. Like, it's not something that I would go running home to tell my mom about, if they gave it to me. So I wouldn't read too much into Giovanni, but not being in there. There are several other very smart people who I thought would be in there somewhere, but weren't. And I guess maybe they thought they had better things to do. And another thing too is that what's at least as important, but that the public doesn't see. But if you're really interested in making law, the thing that you really want is to be on the right committees and get those committee assignments for the finance committee, for the justice committee, for that, even for the House procedural affairs committee, which did a lot of the hearings during COVID that were so embarrassing to the Trudeau government. That, if I was a member of Parliament, that would be what I would want much, much more than a critic's position, unless it was one like finance or some area that I'm personally interested, like Canadian heritage. I would have jumped at that. And I just made fun of it a minute ago because most people aren't interested in it, but I'm a bit of uh, I care about books, and I care about how Canadians see Canada and stuff like that, like in a serious way. So that would be cool for me, but for most people, they're like, "Oh my God, no." But I would love to be on some of those committees if I was an MP. Really, really would fight hard, even though you don't get coverage in the media, you don't get a lot of glory, but you do get a chance to really get your hands into making law, which is really what the job is supposed to be, right?
Governing.
Yeah, governing. Well, yeah, and governing, making policies. If you're in government and getting those policies into legislation and into the world, that's really what the job is about. And if you're a member of the opposition, improving the government's proposals or attacking them if you really do think that they're not good, that they're destructive in some way, or that they're ignoring good advice or whatever. And unfortunately, that usually doesn't end up being what news copy is about.
Mhm. Well, let's segue from this, since we are talking about the return of politicians to Parliament, even though only for 2 weeks. But let's talk a little bit about what that is. What Parliament currently is still under the billion-dollar renovation and the curtains of all that stuff, the
Oh my
cranes and
gosh.
stuff going on. And but I know I spoke with our mutual friend Kevin Bosch, who was my former boss at the Liberal Research Office after I left
Mhm.
BMO, and is now the founder of the Sandstone Group, a lobbying group and a government relations group. And Kevin has been doing these behind the scenes, scandal-ridden tours of Parliament for many years now, and still does them by special request. And he's actually taken some journalists on them. Um, we can't see stuff, but there's, I mean, I could pull up the photo of you and I in Harper's closet.
Yeah, I hope that all that stuff's still there when this horrendous clusterfuck of obscene spending spree is over. And I'm the last person, I hope, to be too cheap about the capital of Canada. I really think that Ottawa has really gone to seed in a big way in the last. I've been here 30 odd years, and it's really gone to hell. But it has. And, the roads are potholed. The downtown is really sketchy. There's a lot of stuff that needs to be fixed, but at the same time, they have spent more money on those renovations in real terms than the cost of the Montreal Olympics. And the center block, there's no date for reopening. There's no real sharing of what they're doing with anybody. They dug this humongous hole in front of it, which people don't really know about because there's a giant hoarding in front of it of the hole, but it's pretty much big enough to actually bury the whole center block in it.
Yep.
It's in solid rock for what, the Fuhrer bunker? I have no idea. I mean, there's going to be all these visitor centers and stuff. It used to be you could just walk into a government building, and if you
Well,
had to go through
there
security.
were tunnels underneath it. There's tunnels from what the former Langevin block, now the
Oh yeah,
Presidential Building, and East and West block to Center block. You could skedaddle under there, and then you could also. I think there's also there wasn't there one to the Supreme Court, and there was also
there's also
tunnels to the big steam center where that poor
yeah,
electrician cooked one day.
yeah. There's also a sort of secret floor under the Parliament building itself. Years and years ago, they blasted out this hole again, and they made this place where they had security equipment, riot equipment, things like that, and also machinery for the building. But this hole is beyond belief. But each of the other buildings around Parliament Hill have been also renovated. So something like somewhere between 750 million and $1 billion for the West Block, 400 million and change for the old insurance company building across from the West Block, 300 million to renovate a train station into a Senate chamber, and then there's other smaller buildings that have been renovated, and then the interior of the center block itself has been completely gutted in the way the White House was under Harry Truman, where they just stripped it right back to the steel framing. But we don't know whether they're going to put it back together to
Well,
remake.
actually, I know a little bit about that heritage renovation because I've been working on a film on a heritage project for Cadillac Fairview, and I've
Yeah,
gone to some of the same heritage facilities, their warehouses, where I've seen a bunch of the bits of Parliament that they're working on. They've taken the
mhm,
benches, they've taken a lot of the stained glass, and they're redoing the stained glass. Some stories of one fellow when they removed one of the benches, they found a wallet from an MP that had been lost for 10 years. And here they thought, and there was still money in this guy's ID in it. And so they were very proud. They phoned him up and they said, "Sir, we found your wallet." And he didn't care. So I guess 10 years ago, what do I care about that wallet? Anyways,
they
the
kept
heritage people are
so
very proud.
they took out the money and threw the wall at the mill, right? Uh,
But there's like wonderful little stories that I mentioned. Kevin
yep.
Bosbrook points out, like in the entrance to the Senate, there are a bunch of sculptures of faces around there done by the Masons, and they're
Yep.
actually of the Masons themselves. They sculpted themselves in there because they wanted to leave. That's something that they do, and there is underneath the security place you mentioned that they built underneath Parliament Hill. I heard a story from a fellow in the Privy Council office that in about the 2010s, well, the RCMP guy was listening down there, and he realized he was picking up radio signals from the cabinet room. And it turns out PCO had just installed a brand new intercom thing, so they can all speak to each other around the table. And for some reason, it was broadcasting all of those frequencies at a low level. And so uh, they discovered this. They told the company that had manufactured this. Turns out the same system was in the White House. And so they then had to phone the White House and say, "Guess what, guys? You've been broadcasting all your meetings."
Yeah. Well, the thing I'm really worried about is the recreation of historic spaces that aren't sort of the main spaces. In other words, I expect the Senate foyer will be the same, and the stuff that people see on TV in the House of Commons foyer. But
The
there's
Hall of
things like the speak.
Heroes and
Well, that one of the problems is that we never the Hall of Honor, which they've never been able to figure out who to honor in the Hall of Honor. So nobody's honored in the Hall of Honor except the nurses from the First World
that's
War.
true.
And but will that space be like that again? Will the speaker's apartment be the same? The spot where the picture of Winston Churchill with the growl in his face in front of the fireplace, will that be restored? Will they have the old press room with its historic fireplace? There were really important things that happened in a lot of these rooms. Will they be restored the way the White House was when Harry Truman had it rebuilt? Where they really put them back, those rooms back looking the way they were and calling them the same thing and using them for the same things. I'm talking about in the main part of the White House. They didn't renovate the rest of the East Wing and the West Wing, or will they basically do what they did to the West Block when they renovated it in the '60s and turn it into an institutional building of that period? So what they did with the West Block, which one of the reasons why it cost so much to fix it, was that they turned it into a '50s or '60s office building with the sort of floors that are easy to clean, and a lot of stripping down of the original sort of artistic crafts work in these places to make them more angular and stuff. Or will they do some sort of 2025 version of that kind of modernization, or will they restore it to the building it was when it was built in the early 1920s, except with modern internet, with asbestos would be good, modern wiring, and all the things that they say it needed to be done for this building to be brought up to code, without and resist the urge to do much more. And I'm really worried that they won't resist the urge to modernize it. I don't think Canadians put enough value in architecture, and understand that architecture is actually a type of communication. It's a way of saying things to people. And if what you're saying is that we don't care about how things were in the past, we think that what we do now is so much better. So that's why we've turned this building into our version of Parliament, as opposed to what it was when it was built, and how it was used over the years by people. We don't care about that either. That space was space where history happened.
When I've asked, I've heard that they are going to preserve the bullet holes from the attempted
Good.
assassination of Stephen Harper, and that would also, I assume, that the closet in the reading room that you and I took our picture in at a children's Christmas party and got caught by then head of the press gallery and told other people were doing it too, and none of us should do that anymore. I would hope that they, like, I mean, the library uh, is is I think going to be one of the first things finished. And they did a wonderful job on the library. Like that
Yeah,
library looks like something out of Harry Potter. It's gorgeous.
yeah.
And
When I talked about the cost of the renovations, I didn't even talk about the several hundred million that went into the library, but they did restore the space. Now it's not restored to how it looked originally, because originally there wasn't a counter, and it was more like the Library of Congress. It had just desks in it,
hmm,
but it does make sense to have a counter and have the space they got. And in that counter, when you go in the door, if you're a human or a bullet, you hit basically a low desk counter thing, and the bottom of that is a bullet hole, and that's one of the bullet holes that survives. Now that
hmm.
bullet went through the wooden door of the library. There's an electronic door of the library that's made of wood. So it went through that, and then it hit the desk of a guy who was working in there, who was somebody I actually know, which scared the hell out of him.
Yeah.
Now there's a couple of other bullet holes. There's also there's not they're not really holes, but there's damage to the stonework, where the bullets hit and chipped the limestone, which I hope they don't fix too. Now that's the poignant part. That's where the guy actually got killed. So those are police bullets. Now, the bullet through the library door might be a police bullet too, for all I know. Yeah, I think one of the things to keep in mind, like when we think of the space where the shootings was, we were talking off camera about a bathroom where a guy blew himself up when he was arming a bomb to throw into the chamber of the House of Commons. He's not the only person who ever came up with that genius idea either, by the way.
Hmm.
People have been thwarted several times trying to do that. But it's not just those kind of spaces that need to be remembered and preserved in some way, or at least memory of their existence preserved, but it's places where things that are important, really important historically, happen. And one of those spaces is the lounge of the old press room on the third floor, what they called the hot room, though it wasn't particularly hot in the years I was there. The There were meetings in there between press censors and the and top journalists during the Second World War to work out how the media would handle the news during the war, and also um, there were meetings between people like Mackenzie King would come in there and talk off the record to journalists, and it was a room where there's this great quote from the Diefenbaker years from Peter Newman, who basically tells the other journalists, well, it's time to overthrow the government. And he's talking when they're doing a non-confidence vote on Diefenbaker's government back in the day, and it was a room where a lot of important things happen in Canadian media history, and I worry that that's going to be just gutted. There was a fireplace with an inscription talking about the importance of a free press
Right.
and
I
importance of
remember that.
information to people. Yeah, it was a beautiful room. And
I
then there was
bet.
a press room.
So there's a secret passage in both the Prime Minister's office and the opposition leader's office on Parliament Hill that I suspect will both get preserved, so the leaders can duck out if they don't want to see a meeting. And there's also a behind the couch. There's a painting with a wall cabinet in the Prime Minister's office, which I was shown by Therese, Prime Minister Paul Martin's ever-loving assistant who's been with him for like 50 years now. They're a lovely relationship, the pair of them. Therese showed me that it's a painting above the couch, and you open it up, and what Mr. Martin kept in there were blankets and pillows because he was famous for an afternoon nap, for his power naps. And she said when we moved in, that it was that when they saw it, Brian Mulrooney used to keep all of his booze in there. A bit of a difference in government. I don't know what Chrétien used it for.
Gosh, I don't know either. Yeah, yeah, and there's a million things like that in that building, and all kinds of interesting relics that belong, to the media, that I hope aren't lost the way stuff was lost when the press club closed, and a lot of really iconic things were just sold, or God knows where they ended up. Um,
Did you
yeah,
ever? I never saw. There used to be a liquor store in Parliament Hill, didn't there?
never saw it. No, I heard it. I know that there was one at one point. There was a barber and a dry cleaner too, but I never saw those. The dry cleaner, the House of Commons dry cleaner, had moved over to Spark Street by the time I was around, and the barber wasn't there at all. The original job of the stewards of the press gallery was to actually bootleg liquor to people in the building before they had the liquor store, and then they became sort of clerks, and they got very official titles and things.
In the pomp and circumstance of King Charles being here, one of the things he's going to do is plant a tree at Rideau Hall.
That's very normal. Um,
So,
I'm surprised not going to Arthur Milne's house and planting a tree there too, because people do eventually end up at Arthur
yeah,
Milne's house in Kingston. But yeah, that's there's if you water the grounds of Rideau Hall, and I think it's probably a hell of a lot harder now than it used to be. There are a lot of trees with little signs
yeah,
planted
I think it's
by.
quite a lovely tradition.
It is. It's really good, and looking at the itinerary, and God knows we've been all over the place in this conversation. It's a very, very low key, low energy, not dragging him around too much uh, uh, plan that they have for his visit, because he's 77 years old now,
Yeah,
um,
he
and
just had
he's
cancer too.
well, he's still being treated for cancer, which makes the visit all the more remarkable. That it would have been so easy for him to beg off, right?
Yeah.
And he hasn't. So he wants
Well,
to do this.
I imagine the RCMP are absolutely apoplectic at having to do security for the King of England in an open landau from
King of
Rideau Hall
Canada.
to Parliament Hill. Like, I mean, they are
He's not
not going
going.
to let the Wellington regular guys there with their F. Carney flags get in the
They're
way of
not.
the shot.
They're not going to go. They're not going to come from Rideau Hall in the Landau.
They're
They,
not?
they have they have a trick planned, and it's already been in the paper, so it's not like
Not a great trick, then, is it?
no, no. But the thing is that they're not going to go through Sketchyville on the Landau through the market and stuff
Oh,
along Sussex. They're going to take him to a place on Wellington, plonk him in the Landau, and go like 2 or 3 blocks in the Landau to the Senate. So
oh,
it's not a long ride. It's not going to be a grueling thing for him just sit in this thing and worry that some nut's going to take a whatever. So, and it's very careful with security, and those guys will not be around. Um, though they are around all the time, like they're in front of Carney's, the door into Carney's office building
They're not
has these
there
clowns.
every day. I drive by there fairly regularly, and I always look out for them. And they're,
They're there,
not they're
yes.
not they're not constant. But there was just that.
Um, they seem to be there pretty much every time I go by there.
Mm,
Now that's a coincidence, by the way.
mm.
Um, yeah, they're you know it might be time for them to get a life, um, but and they have every right to protest. Don't get me wrong, um, but it, I'm not sure what they're saying with fuck Carney flags. I I mean, I know that Justin Trudeau is very attractive, and they offered and they offered and they offered, and I don't think he ever put up with them. The Carney thing
You
is a
think there was
little
a
more.
question mark on those flags?
Yeah, I think there was. I think that was like a silent question mark. The Carney thing, now they seem to be getting desperate. No, I'm not trying to put down Carney. I met his wife. She seems very nice. She's probably quite picky. She just doesn't settle for someone by the looks of things. But it might be time for them to just move on. I'm just saying that as sort of their life coach, not as somebody who wants to censor them. But they just they remind me of that idiot priest that was there for years with the pictures of the aborted babies. He was quite disgusting, and not
Oh
that
yes.
his yeah, it wasn't that his there were many
It
people
was
who
his
agree with.
photo art that was really objectionable.
Yeah, it wasn't his politics. It was this. The little kids would be coming by on their school trips, and they'd see these pictures of these.
Well, the Falun Gong had quite a collection of art as well for a while out there.
Yeah, they did, and at least they came and left, and they actually weren't. The priest was right on the sidewalk. You couldn't go by unless you cut
Yeah,
off the sidewalk and went into the grass. And Parliament Hill's often quite sloppy when it's had a lot of rain like it has now.
yeah.
And so you couldn't really get by this guy without looking. He didn't say anything. He didn't like bother people in that way, but it was pretty harsh. And I think that it wasn't the best way for him to make his point, partly because what he was showing pictures of really weren't even um, were were like, I'm not sure what they were, anencephalic,
Yeah.
long term fetuses or whatever. They weren't really pictures of a normal first trimester abortion thing. And even if they were, that's really not kosher. But again, he was there for years because Canada does cherish free expression rights, and the man had free expression rights. I just have the right to say that I thought it was over the top. So, and with the Carney guys, they can be there forever, but they just add to the sort of shabbiness of downtown Ottawa. I don't think anyone's going to worry too much about the free expression rights of all of the meth heads and crack heads who are also going to be shunted aside when the king comes, because they're sure not going to be out with their Hortons cups anywhere where the foreign press and the VIPs from the UK are going to see them.
Hmm. It will be very interesting to see how the Alberta separatist movement is tackled by Poilievre when he starts representing Alberta.
Yeah, yeah, and it's one of those minefields that he has. And this is a problem that he always has, and as one of his biographers, um, I could see this as a problem for him as I sort of dug into his life. Now he doesn't have as much of a problem as, say, Aaron O'Toole, who was actually a sort of normal conservative, small c conservative. Aaron O'Toole is not an Alberta separatist um, or a shill for big oil or any of that sort of stuff, though he probably likes big oil more than I do. Um, but the problem for Poilievre is that he has always sort of moved in the circles of these folks who are the biggest pushers of Alberta separatism or a demand for a renegotiation of confederation or whatever this will morph into. Um, and if he decides that he wants to reach out to the rest of Canada, he has to sort of disentangle himself from these people. But then they also have the opportunity to start their own party, like they did with Reform, in the 80s, to join Max Bernier's party or to do something else. You, Nobody owns anybody's vote. And Poilievre doesn't own the votes of these people. He rents them. I mean, I would say that all those people voted for the Conservatives in the last election. Maybe a few of them voted for Bernier's party, but if he crawls into this disgusting bed of Alberta separatism, then he can't possibly be Prime Minister of Canada. So this is, he gets into these binds. It's a real problem for the Conservatives. They get into these binds of how much do you play to this base in Alberta, and how much do you play towards people who don't want this kind of politics in Canada, and can you win without winning both the nut crowd and the normal centrist and slightly right of center people, the Bill Davis Conservatives in Ontario, the Doug Ford Conservatives in Ontario, some of them, or Doug Ford himself. And then if you're going to make inroads in Quebec, you have a whole other thing, another game you have to play. So it's a pretty tricky thing for a conservative leader now, especially one from Alberta. Um, I think he'll easily win that seat without whether he comes out on Alberta separatism or not. But well, we'll find out within a few weeks whether there's an overlap between the um, separatism petition and his campaign. Right, like the separatism petition thing may be over by the time his campaign starts, or they may be on top of each other. He may just try to weasel out of it, say, well, this is up to the people of Alberta. It's a provincial thing. Who knows? But he will definitely be pulled into it, not only by, or people will try to pull him in, not only Conservatives, but Liberals will try to get him on the spot on that without having to put their own views on the record. Not that people in Alberta give much of a damn about what Liberals think of anything.
Mm. Yeah, it'll also be interesting to see if he's able to maintain caucus discipline. There was that report yesterday, the day before, from RDI on, I think they got 11 anonymous conservative MPs to talk about wanting to fire Jenny Byrne, and that's been a pretty tight message ship all since during all that election. There wasn't a lot of bozo explosions there, and so even though these guys are not putting their name to their comments, they're talking to the media again, and they started appearing on some of the talk shows that the Conservatives have been banned on. I'm sure that it will be a bit of a job for Poilievre to keep those reins as tight as he had them when he walks back in.
Yeah, it might be, but I think one of the things he's trying to do to preempt that is to have an early convention in Alberta in
Right.
the fall. Now that again might overlap with his own campaign for the by-election, but the Conservatives have control of when that convention date is set, and it hasn't been set yet. So I think his plan is to go in there, get a leadership mandate or renewal or whatever you want to call it. Go through leadership review, win it, hope that stands for 3 or 4 years or whenever the next election is, and then basically say to them, well, the party has endorsed my leadership. Are you going to stab me in the back under the Reform Act, which they've passed? The caucus has passed this has a has basically signed on to this federal act that allows them to do things like fire the leader if they which is how Poilievre actually got in the first place. But if he has this mandate early on from the rank and file of the party to continue as leader, it gets a lot harder for them to threaten him. How
It's funny
far
you
down?
mentioned the recall petitions that can happen. That it's really interesting that nobody's done that to Daniel Smith, who's saying we'll have the secessionist one, but I kept expecting Naheed Nenshi or somebody smart to come up and go, okay, I got one. Let's recall the premier.
Well, I think Nenshi and I would agree with him as far as from what I know of polling so far in Alberta, and is that this separatism thing hasn't got a chance of flying.
No,
So why get into that sandbox at
better
all?
chance of Nenshi getting a by-election.
Well, or yeah, Nenshi getting a by-election or waiting it out. I mean, eventually is going to be a provincial election in Alberta, and if Nenshi can stay out of the pigsty and be the clean, sane person that everybody seems to want to run governments these days instead of these screwballs, if he can come across as not nuts, he basically meets the bar of an awful lot of voters like me who are really sick of the crazy. So if I were him, I would just sit there and just let them fight, and then fight who's ever still standing.
And with that, thank you for joining us for episode 5 of the History Echoes podcast. I'm Mick Zosky. This is Mark Burry.